In these days of earnest discussions about Christian nationalism, I thought it would be useful to compare systems of belief that are uncodified. What do I mean by uncodified? It means that you have a belief system with no codified principles. What are codified principles? Examples are the 10 Commandments, the 7 no-hide laws, the 5 pillars of Islam, the 13 principles of Judaism, the Eightfold Path, the Four Noble Truths. These are basically numbered principles by which people who claim to be adherents of a particular belief system can display their credentials for being members of that belief system by being able to rattle off their codified principles. Obviously, if you don't have codified principles, what's going to happen is that the most powerful person in, for example, National Socialism, liberalism, communism, socialism, fascism will say, I have the right to say what fascism, Nazism, liberalism, conservatism is. And obviously, this would not be very principled, because what this means is that people who have control of the brand will be using that brand to sell their snake oil. And we will know from the brand of Jesus what so many church leaders and Christian monarchs have done about using the brand of Jesus to sell their snake oil. But that's not the only one. Obviously, you can do it to any other brand if it's well known enough to be recognizable. You're going to say you're a conservative or a liberal or whatever, because you think that brand attracts a group of people who are attracted to that idea. And like the picture on the label. So as far as MAGA is concerned, it's nice and vague, isn't it? It's a slogan. It's not defined properly. You could make America great again by becoming an autarky of self-sufficient Americans in a territory big enough to be self-sufficient and have its own manufacturing base. Or it could be make America great again with American imperialism and neocon wars. That, in fact, was what Trump was supposed to be against. So as you can see, the American voter has been rather cheated out of the whole thing. They believed that by voting for Trump, they would get an anti-immigration, anti-imperialism kind of president. And now the American president is just conforming to type. So they must be very disappointed indeed and wondering what else they could have done, what else they can do in order to get American presidents to keep their promises. Now, how can you ensure that politicians keep their promises? It's very hard to do if what they'll do is tell us lies that we want to believe and then break all their promises and then mock us for being stupid enough to believe and being helpless enough to have no choice but to wish to believe in their lies and then be tricked again and again into voting for politicians who never change the policy that everyone is complaining about. So we know that Marjorie Taylor Greene has retired from politics because she doesn't want to fight Trump, who claims that he has got the right to MAGA. Obviously, Marjorie Taylor Greene has a different idea to MAGA, and was saying, but you said, Mr. President, that you would end the endless wars and you would publish the Epstein files, and obviously he's not doing anything of the sort. But back to the question of how we can make our politicians not lie to us. Well, if we were less careless with the truth ourselves, then we might have a culture of people who have a strict regard for truth, and we would have a ruling class with an even stricter regard for truth. But sadly, at the moment, we get out of untruths by saying we were only joking, people were stupid for taking something said ironically, seriously, and even naive to expect people not to tell lies. So obviously, if we want change, we would have to create the change in ourselves. We would have to think outside the box. That is the coffin of representative democracy. If we refuse to question the operation of representative democracy, then we will continue to be lied to by our corrupt and incompetent ruling classes who know that we are too afraid to think outside the box and think of a new moral and legal political system by which to hold our ruling classes accountable. And what I propose is simply a rule system that has a list of rules that everybody knows. So in the case of Americans, they have their Constitution and their Bill of Rights with their 27 or 28 amendments? Only the first 10 are mentioned in their Bill of Rights. Obviously, it's a little ambitious to be able to remember exactly how many amendments there have been, but 10 is reasonably easy to remember, like the 10 Commandments. And this is what I mean. It has to be, well, around 10, or people will forget. They won't be able to remember 15 or 14. They might stretch to 13, but that is about the limit for most ADHD people. So what we need is really an idea that we can hold in our heads without, being brain boxes. And this means we need a moral and legal political system that is established enough for people to say, well, we always knew that, or we know an expert on the subject. But if we continue to allow our corrupt and incompetent ruling classes to keep making up the rules as we go along, then we are, in fact, expecting somebody we know to be a liar and a cheat, to play Monopoly with us and keep letting them be the banker. while being illiterate and not being able to read the rules to the game of Monopoly. So, well, that's it really. It's really very simple. So, what can Americans do? Well, obviously, I'll be saying secular Quranism because it's based on a book that everyone has heard about. The fact that most people hate the Quran because most Westerners are Islamophobes is actually quite helpful so that Republicans and Democrats can at least say that the other is not getting their way completely. And the fact that nobody likes it is actually a point in its favour. So, to sum up, MAGA needs principles. MAGA has no principles. And Marjorie Taylor Greene has retired from politics because she knows she's not going to win that argument because Trump has total control over what MAGA means. And if he means more neocon wars to make America great again, then he has control over the branding of MAGA. Tax insurance accessories, TIA. I'm not actually vouching for Farage because he's been given the seal of approval by a very sinister man called Alan Mendoza in the Telegraph. And I think what's his title? I know he's president, I think, of the Henry Jackson Society, which is, of course, the Society for Neocon Wars. He's a handler of Melanie Phillips, and yes, he's co-founder and executive director of the Henry Jackson Society, so he's the head honcho. Painted laugh. I don't know why you don't think America is relevant. If you're anyone really living in any country in the world, America is relevant because it's a global hegemon. It is certainly in charge of Europe and South America, and I suppose the problem is people don't really know. They think that their European country or wherever their country is has an independent foreign policy. The only countries in the world that have an independent foreign policy would be China, Russia, and Iran, and they have been demonized and labeled because they won't obey the wishes of Uncle Sam. So I was talking about Melanie Phillips. Somebody mentioned her name recently, and I know she's a kind of conservative Jewess who started off working in the Guardian, and I think the story was that she started off left wing. She's secular, and because she had children and whom she couldn't afford to send to private school, she investigated the educational system and discovered to her horror that it was metaphorically squirming with maggots. I have made my own investigations, and really the whole purpose of the educational establishment is to hide its mistakes. And to this day, they continue hiding their mistakes, and because of the attitude that Melanie Phillips took towards sacred leftist doctrines, she was marginalised and removed from journalism, and I guess she found herself promoting Zionism, and I've seen her speak and with Alan Mendoza there. So Zionism is, well, obviously very controversial, but one of the most interesting disagreements or controversies about Zionism was when the former mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, tried to say that the Nazis were, in their own Nazi way, Zionists, because if you want to kick out your Jews, you would have to find somewhere to put them, and the Nazis had their Madagascar plan because they were planning to put their Jews in Madagascar, and then when with Vichy France fell, they obviously had to make other plans. And one of the things that Muslims cannot face is being told that Allah is also Zionist. So obviously, if Jews have some sort of divine right to live in the Holy Land, what are Gentiles to make of it? And I'm saying, in a way, it's very simple. They have to live under God's laws in the Holy Land, and this means that it cannot be under a liberal democracy with gay parades in Tel Aviv. Sadly, for Westerners, gay parades in Tel Aviv and other Western cities is actually now a kind of sacred procession. It's now been, what's the word? Embedded in the calendar every year. So it's June, right? June is Pride Month. And we've sort of got new kinds of seasonal rituals, shall we say. And obviously they celebrate things that are considered objectionable by social conservatives. I see that you're an Indian living in the UK. You're Christian. So I'll just quickly explain to you what I've been talking about, which is that there are certain belief systems, such as Hinduism and Christianity, and liberalism and conservatism, and nationalism and socialism and communism, that do not have codified principles. And I'm saying these belief systems are not, in fact, workable and should be abandoned, because through not having codified principles, you are going to have a problem with the most powerful person in, say, Christianity, conservatism, liberalism, etc., saying that Christianity, conservatism, etc., is exactly what they say it is. In fact, I am reminded of, well, I think it was Humpty Dumpty and Alice in Wonderland, saying, I'll just find it for you then, for the exact quote. I think it was Humpty Dumpty saying, words are exactly what I mean. I say they mean. In Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, Humpty Dumpty asserts that when he uses a word, it means exactly what he chooses it to mean, neither more nor less. This statement is part of a broader philosophical exchange where Humpty challenges conventional linguistic norms, claiming that word meanings are determined solely by individual intent. Alice responds with skepticism, questioning whether one can make words mean so many different things. Humpty counters that the real issue is not meaning, but control, which is to be master. That's all. This dialogue has been widely analysed by philosophers of language, with Ludwig Wittgenstein arguing that language is inherently social and that meanings are established through communal usage, not individual decree. Thus, while Humpty Dumpty's view represents a radical individualism in language, it is generally rejected in favour of the idea that the meaning arises from shared understanding and consensus. There you go. Oh, so you're another Indian. Um, Thank you for your kind words, saying that I'm smart and you like me. Um, and you say the issue with the West is the failing of men, masculine, and well, the failure of masculinity in men. Islam is really a religion for persons in the Middle East. Now, no, because there's only one Abrahamic God, is there not? Now, I know you're a different person to the Indian called Painted Love, who's Christian, but Christianity is an Abrahamic religion like Judaism and Islam. So they worship the same God, though obviously there are disagreements between these rival religions about whose interpretation and conception of God is most correct. Indio Bro says, and having some kind of secular Islam is honestly autistic as hell. The Quran was likely written by the Jews who also fathered Christianity, just different sects. No, it doesn't matter who it's written by. What I'm saying is that the Quran is the best available guide to humanity. And for that reason, if we want to have the benefit of the best religion, we should use the best one available. What's the problem? I know that Indians are also Islamophobes, but you can't exactly point to, Hinduism and say it's better than Islam, can you? I mean, in terms of empire, you will know that it was Christians who were most successful at acquiring empire. The global hegemon is still America. What do you think made Europeans so successful? I would say it was monogamy, making their societies more stable than Islam, which is incorrectly followed anyway, because there were only 4 rightly guided caliphs after Muhammad, which means all the other ones were not rightly guided, and that's why the caliphate is now extinct. And I'm saying, of course they're not going to be rightly guided if they're absolute monarchs. And so we need to properly consider the difference between being a republic and being a monarchy. India Bro says, I don't disagree with you that Christianity in Western Europe and the US has failed, but is this because it is Protestant? E. Michael Jones and Catholics would argue this. Well, yes, they would argue this, but my position is that the Reformation was inevitable. It was a historical inevitability. Because if you look at church history, you will. I think it's a problem with these Europeans. They won't acknowledge that when they were first converted to Christianity, they were barbarians, right? They were not civilized compared to Rome. So they were easily impressed by Christian missionaries from Rome, the eternal city, with their, kind of mystique of being, from the eternal city and being, coming from the place where their conquerors used to come from. Britain was conquered by the Romans. And even after Rome fell, it still had this mystique. And, even though the Roman Empire, as it then was no longer in existence, there was still, Italy and the Papal States and obviously the priesthood of the Roman Empire had, shrunk into being the Catholic Church, but it was the only idea in the whole of Europe. So everybody felt obliged to use it. And that was what they did, and that's how you got the Holy Roman Empire, and then you got, the wars of the Reformation. So, with regard to these barbarian kings, obviously they were going to listen to the Pope because the Pope crowned them and presided over their coronation, and so they had to do what the Pope said, and the Pope would send over one of his people to help the barbarian king govern his barbarian kingdom. So I know a lot of people who were conquered by the British probably find it hard to imagine the British as, barbarians, painting themselves in blue and fighting the Romans. But, once upon a time, their kings could not read and were happy to take instructions from the Archbishop of Canterbury, which was sent to them by the Pope. And obviously, after a few generations of, learning Greek and Latin and learning their own history, these kings would get their own ideas about how to govern their kingdom and resented being told by the Pope what to do. And eventually they would think the Pope is really not that special. He's just another politician like us. And he's doing really rather dodgy things like selling indulgences or annoying things like not agreeing to the annulment of my marriage to my first wife, who can no longer give me any children, let alone a son. So you can see really that it was only natural, inevitable, really, that the monarchs of Europe would eventually reject the authority of the Vicar of Rome. And this, I think, E. Michael Jones and Catholics cannot bear to hear. And that's why their criticism of the Anglican Church is so virulent. I mean, I know what E. Michael Jones is saying, is that we Catholics knew exactly what to do with the Jews until you lot came along and took over, and now the Jews are controlling everything and everyone. That is his narrative. But I'm saying it's actually very little to do with the Jews. The problem Jews are basically liberals, and also the problem Gentiles are also liberals. And therefore, the problem is liberalism. And liberalism is is really the political orthodoxy of our age. And even the Pope submits to the liberal order. We know that the Archbishop of Canterbury, now female, is supports gay marriage, etc. But traditionally, I think you will find that the Archbishop of Canterbury had to go along with whatever the king wanted or find himself burnt at the stake. So, really, the church, even going back to Roman times, was only a creature of the state, and that there could be no question of the priesthood being more powerful than the king, because the priest would never control the army or the police or the judiciary. So Islam actually makes this quite clear by dispensing with the priesthood. So if you're going to look at the people in an Islamic order that is closest to being the priesthood, it would be the judiciary. And there's actually a word for it called a critarchy. And this was what ancient Israel was. You will know that the book of Judges comes before the book of Kings. And the book of Kings sorry, what am I trying to say? I'm saying that I'm sorry. Okay, so the book of Samuel records the conversation with Samuel. It records Samuel saying, warning the Israelites that God wasn't happy with their decision, with their request for a king. Saying, you do realize, don't you, that the king is going to tax you and he's going to send you to fight his imperial wars and very likely abuse his power. But the Jews said, no, we want a king. It's cool to have kings. We looked around us and we see that the Gentiles have kings and we want to be cool too. Or words to that effect. And so God, well known for giving people the rope they need to hang themselves with, gave the Jews a king, and the rest is history. And thank you for your comments. I'll have to read them more carefully. Indubro says, I think that the economy and state of the nation must be intrinsically tied to the nation's religion. Damn right. The religious question is a question at hand. Oh, you're interested in my work? Great. Well, this is it. The Quran regulates gender relations, labor relations, consumer relations, and international relations. It's holistic, as I'm sure you will remember Muslims saying. So let's do it and be protected in every regard so that our gender relations will be properly regulated so that men and women wouldn't hate each other and have a string of failed relationships with neurotic and damaged children. We would have. And if gender relations were properly regulated, then the quality of parenting would improve and the and the labour force would be adequately supplied by these legitimate children of married parents. And then Westerners wouldn't, well, the neocons wouldn't feel that they need to go around robbing everyone. So I'm saying we do have. Well, okay, I don't see how anyone could even say that the Quran isn't the best available guide to humanity, because nobody, when I point this out to them, can actually say, "Oh, no, you're wrong there. The best available guide to humanity is da-da," and they can't. They're just silence, and then they run away. The whole obsession and back and forth with Jews or about Jews is tiresome. I don't hate anyone and wish to see peace. Yes, yes, yes. Look, of course everybody's obsessed with Jews because the global hegemon considers itself to be Christian, and it's fighting with the Muslims in Israel. So I'm sorry, I just don't see how you can avoid the subject of religion and Jews, because the religion of Christianity and Islam is derived from the religion of the Jews. So there's no way you can escape it. Just accept this logical necessity. The common man does not understand these deep questions, nor should he. Well, I think I've simplified it enough for ordinary people to be able to understand it. The people need to be making families and living their lives. But yes, yes. So they need a religion, and they need a religion that is easy to believe, and it can't be Christianity because, well, it doesn't make sense, does it? For one thing, Christianity is idolatry. It is undeniably idolatry to indulge in anthropomorphism. Anthropomorphism is worshipping or deities with human characteristics. And this is what Christians do. This is what Hindus do too. And all kinds of people, in China, whatever. I mean, even Buddhists feel they have to worship, the Buddha. So this is, a very universal tendency. You can't just sort of show them an empty room and say, that's it. And people go, well, what? Well, we want something. Give us something. But the point is, if you worship objects, you're not getting the idea. And the idea is all important. And only if we internalize the idea that we're not supposed to be worshipping idols, will we be forced reluctantly to reading the book and going by the book and arguing about words in the book with each other so that we are literate and not stupid and able to make and understand sound arguments and know the difference between sound arguments and valid arguments, and be able to prevent ourselves from being bamboozled by the fast talking con man or politician. And this is really the minimum of moral reasoning that is required in somebody who regards himself as intelligent and educated. So I disagree with you about the common man being told that these things are beyond his understanding. Even if he does not care to read the Quran, he should at least know that the answers to his questions will be contained in the Quran, and not be content to be told by his imam what the Quran says. But we know that these Muslims are not very good at it. Well, even people under conditions of universal education find it very hard to read books they don't like, and maybe only possibly 20 to 10% of people actually bother doing these things, and I'm one of them. But it's not really that hard. But who am I to say what's hard or not hard for the average person? I'm saying, in theory, they could read it. It's not that difficult. But they choose not to apply it themselves because probably they don't want to be seen to be reading the Quran by their, Islamophobic family members and friends and whatever. So they never do it. And instead nurse their hatred, which actually prevents them from seeing the light. So however much you hate Islam and Muslims, there's just no way of getting round the fact that the Quran is the best available guide to humanity, simply because nobody will be able to think of a better one. So I think I've made my point about codified principles. Because if you don't have codified principles, your corrupt and incompetent ruling classes will keep making up the rules as they go along and say, this word is what I say it means, and because I'm the most powerful person in the land, what I say is the truth. Somebody mentioned E. Michael Jones, and he is famous for saying, truth is the opinion of the powerful.